Alright guys, Hayes here, welcome back to the channel for another video. So, in life, a lot of people don't have opportunities to get things off their chest. I'm in a fortunate position where I have got a platform. Whether it's viewed by a lot of people or not, it doesn't really make a difference. But this platform offers me the ability to get certain things off my chest. And in this case, I really want to talk about the UK and basically the state of the UK at the moment. And in particular, one aspect of what's going on with the UK government essentially and the people within the UK. And this is something that's deeply personal to me, and I'll explain it in just a moment, but I feel like it's actually disgusting to see this unfolding in real time and seeing what's actually happening to people and people's lives. So people may or may not be aware. If you're from the UK, you'll certainly be aware. If you're from outside the UK, you might not be aware. But basically, the government have decided to have an attack on the disabled and the sick within the UK, okay? There's such a thing as what's called the welfare bill, or the welfare state within the UK, and we've always had an ethos in the UK of you look after those who are most in need, right? It's just the way things are. It's like the NHS, we don't leave people to get sick and die, and we don't leave people to starve and go hungry if they're in poverty, etc. And right now, they've obviously been overspending on this, and they've just been overspending in general, to be honest, and they need to find ways to trim the fat, so to speak, okay? And what I've literally witnessed unfolding over the last few months, and it's really intensified over the last few weeks, is a systematic bout of propaganda, essentially, really perpetuated by the media in a lot of senses, okay? Now, traditionalist media has kind of moved away from your normal talk shows on TV and stuff, and a lot of it's moved on to this platform. It's moved on to YouTube, and you've got channels like Piers Morgan, you've got things like Talk UK. I'm not specifically targeting Piers Morgan because I don't think he's spoken too much about this, but those type of shows where you take those talking heads, those experts who know about a certain topic, and they go on to talk about things, okay? And I've seen a lot of demonizing of the sick and the disabled, because that is where these cuts are coming from, okay? Now, I said that this was personal to me, and I'm going to get to that, but watching these shows, you're seeing anyone who's in receipt of benefits, whether they be disabled, sick or whatever, being labelled as scroungers, being labelled as people that don't want to go and work and things like that. Now, there's obviously an element, everyone knows this, there's obviously an element of people who game the system, right? That exists in any system that exists, okay? If you look at anything in life, if there is a system to be abused, then there will be an element of people who will abuse that system, okay? But the problem is, when you see a lot of the reporting around this topic, when you see a lot of these channels who are giving their opinions, who are bringing on these so-called experts to discuss it, they don't make the distinction of they're talking about a smaller element. They talk about it like they are speaking about everyone who is in receipt of these things like PIP, like sickness benefits, etc. And they label them as being work shy, they label them as playing the system. They make really, I want to say, bad use of terms like these people are spending your money, etc, okay? And they demonize these people to the viewers, okay? And those viewers are the voters and the people who back these things. So when they hear things like, you've got Steve who lives in your street who could go and work, but instead he claims he's got this thing wrong with him and he doesn't go to work, that's what those people hear. They just hear everyone that's doing this is at it and it's a scammer, okay? And one thing that really caught my ire just a few days ago was this distinction between physical disabilities and mental disabilities, okay? And one show in particular, I don't want to highlight them because I don't want them to have more publicity, but they actually had people saying, we all know that it's not the same level of severity for someone who has a physical disability as someone who has a mental disability, okay? And that is exactly where this touches me on a personal level, okay? Now, for background, I've got 2 children. My children are 12 years old. Both my children are severely disabled, okay? Mentally. it's classed as a mental disability. It's classed as what's called an invisible disability because they're not in a wheelchair. They don't need to have assistance like with canes or breathing apparatus, that type of stuff. However, both my 12-year-old children work at the mental capacity of sub 2 years old, okay? I need to do everything in life for my kids. I need to wash them, bathe them, toilet them. I need to keep them safe when they're outside. They'd have no awareness of danger. They would die. Like, I'm being quite blunt about it. They would die. When they're at school, they need 2 members of staff per child to make sure they don't die. I know that sounds a bit blunt and I sound a bit flippant, but they have no life outside of their bubble of care, what they need done for them. They're likely, unfortunately, never going to have an independent life. They're not going to experience what me and you experience. And to be fair, they're probably not going to experience what a lot of people with physical disabilities are going to be able to experience. Now, someone who's in a wheelchair, it's going to be very, very hard for them, and 100% they totally need additional support. Like, just doing what me and you take for granted, it's not going to happen for them, okay? But they are still going to experience things like emotional connection, friendships, etc. Whereas some people with mental disabilities will never have that, okay? So systematically watching this government, these talking heads, etc., actually acting like these people are less in need of some form of care, support or whatever because they don't have a physical thing hanging over them, to me it's disgusting. Like, it's quite frankly disgusting. And the thing is, I just need to preface this by saying this isn't a, oh my god, he's concerned because this is going to affect him. I live in Scotland and this element, benefits, are devolved to the Scottish Parliament, and even though I'm all for the union, this isn't going to affect Scotland. This is going to affect people in England, right? And that's unfortunate because it basically means within the UK, you're going to have a 2-tier system of, even though we are all part of the United Kingdom, people who are disabled in England are going to basically be looked after less than people who are disabled in Scotland, which in itself to me is just ridiculous anyway, right? But it disgusts me that instead of looking at things that could either generate more revenue or reduce costs by taxation, etc., on the billion-dollar companies who get away with the amount of tax they're paying, etc., they're deciding that, you know what, we're going to demonise and we're going to go after the lowest members of society. And that's not me diminishing people, that's not me saying that people who are disabled are lower than anyone else, but they're the easiest target, so to speak, okay? I find that disgusting, right? I think ultimately that is something that I never really thought I would see from this country, and in a lot of ways it kind of makes me ashamed to be from this country, because this country has rampant wastage, okay? We have massive issues, and I'm not going to get drawn into it too much, but there's a lot of money that could be either generated elsewhere or not wasted elsewhere. And you have to wonder at times, do these people who run this country have common sense? Like, just general common sense? Because some of the things that you see, I feel like someone with even a modicum of intelligence, with even 5 or 6 functioning brain cells, would see where it's a problem. Now, I'm not against immigration. It's not something I'm against. I'm not one of these, oh my god, we shouldn't let foreigners into the country stuff. I think that situations dictate certain things need to happen, right? But I do think we have a problem with immigration because we have a housing shortage, okay? In the UK, there's a nationwide housing shortage. There's not enough social housing. And this all stems from the Tories, Margaret Thatcher, selling off a lot of what they call social housing, which is essentially council-owned housing that people can then rent, etc., at less than what the private market does. I don't know if they have something like that in the States. They probably do, but in the UK, it used to be a thing. Like, your mum, dad, granddad, etc., you probably had someone within your family who had one of these houses, and if they were fortunate enough, they probably bought one of those houses for pennies on the pound. Essentially 90, 100 grand houses being sold for £10,000. It's mental, right? But we are in a point just now where nationwide there is not enough houses to sustain what people need. So if you keep bringing people into the country, where do they go? I see it as square peg, round hole. It doesn't work. So that's the only reason I think we need to chill on that type of stuff. It's not because of any other motive other than it doesn't work. There's nowhere for people to go, so how do you do it? But that's like money that's being wasted, okay? That's not something we're looking at trimming back. You've then got things like, this might be a bit of a hot controversial take here, but you've got things like cannabis, okay? Now, I don't smoke cannabis anymore, I used to, but there's billions of pounds spent illegally per year on cannabis. It's a fact, we know this. The estimated bill for illegal cannabis use is, I think it's, the last I looked, it's around about 2.5 to 3 billion, maybe even 4 billion pounds per year spent within the UK illegally. So that's money going to drug dealers, etc., not going anywhere near the economy, okay? If that was legalised and tax was applied to it, then that is what, 20-30% the government could be generating from that illegal market. But not only that, it would cause there to be more jobs, manufacturing jobs, etc., and obviously it would be regulated. Now, there's probably a lot more to it than me just saying, okay, it should be legal. But you look at countries like Germany, you look at countries like the United States, etc., who have now done this, and an industry has popped up around it. And in fact, the UK actually is quite a big exporter of that, and they do make some money sending it out the way, just not within the country. But that in itself is a large sum of money that could be generated through taxation, right? These cuts to people who are the most vulnerable members of society, it's estimated that it's probably going to generate around about 5 billion over 5 years. So that's around about, what, £1 billion per year. If you're looking at an industry that currently in the UK is around about 3 to 4 billion that's been spent illegally, and you think taxation, 20-25% I think it is, you're generating almost £1 billion there, and you're not actually making anyone suffer. You're generating more jobs, which is going to generate more income tax, etc. And actually, it would probably top up the government coffers more than what something like this is going to. Now, that's just one example. I mean, again, that could be a bit of a hot take depending on your thoughts on that, your point of view on that. But for me personally, as long as it's done in the right way, I personally don't have an issue with it, apart from the fact that I wouldn't want to smoke it again, and if it was legal, maybe I would, hopefully not, we'd need to wait and see. But instead of doing that, they're demonising people who are disabled, they're going after people who are disabled, they are minimising people who have mental disabilities, things like depression, anxiety. Now, that is where the kicker comes in, right? For me, anxiety and depression ultimately is something that someone could in theory fake, right? Because it's one of those things that, how do you prove it as such? If someone knows what the trigger points are, what the symptoms are, etc., and they're good at what they do, I mean, yeah, that's probably the one that's used most often to game the system, so to speak. But you can't specifically say that we need to target people who have got anxiety and depression, because it kind of flies in the face of everything that has happened over the last multiple years within the UK and probably worldwide. So over the last few years, obviously, I'd say this particularly is for men, although I do think it's more of a worldwide thing, all genders, not just specifically for men. But there's been this whole campaign of it's okay not to be okay. There's this thing about encouraging men particularly, and the reason for this is because there's a lot of men who ultimately take their own lives through depression and anxiety and not speaking about it and not kind of getting the help that they need. But there's been this big push for those people to have the confidence to go forward, to speak to someone, to seek help, to try to get the help they need to overcome maybe demons they're battling in their head, or just general feelings that they've got inside that essentially make them not think life's worth living anymore. Fast forward to now, however, and those people are being made to feel like they're con men. They're gaming the system. They're bad. You know, they are reading these stories and they're seeing that they're the problem. Okay, they're why the country's got such a drain on the economy, etc. And to me, that's awful, because you've gone from encouraging people essentially to come forward and talk about these things and get help that they might need, to now they're worried that they're the demon, they're the bad guy. They're watching these talking heads who don't have a clue, who've never lived it, talking about things and talking about how they are just people that want to sit at home and they're work shy and they could do more, they just choose to not do more, etc. And unfortunately, I think that in itself could make a lot of people's situations worse, okay? I think a lot of problems stem from the fact that people talk about things that they either lack empathy towards, or apathy is probably a better way of putting it, which is something you find quite a lot. But firsthand, I can say, I think it's because they haven't walked a mile in other people's shoes, so to speak. Okay, now I've had my own issues with anxiety, depression. I've got a video on my channel being very blunt, frank, and honest about my own personal struggles, because I've got ADHD and I like to overshare. So I've never really had a problem with bottling it up, right? If anything, I'm the opposite, right? I talk about it too much, right? But not everyone's like that. And you find a lot of people look down their nose at things they've never experienced, right? I still get it. I go shopping with my kids, and I've explained already about my kids. When I'm out, my kids can sometimes cause a scene, right? And they can scream. One in particular, one's not quite like that, but the other one is. They can scream, they can sometimes attack me, maybe attack their mother, and we still get looks. And I get very conscious about this, right? We get looks, we get people looking at us, we get people acting like we're bad, like we're doing something wrong, as if we've not raised our children right. And the reason being, these people just lack the understanding of what is going on. Now, do I kind of blame them for that? I guess not, because ultimately I didn't really understand how bad things could get until it was my life, and I would see other parents at the school, etc., and kind of the struggles that they had to go through. So there's a part of me that understands why the general public maybe don't always get it, but I think people in positions of power should 100% get it. It should be part of their remit. They should be made to go and experience this stuff and understand this stuff, instead of talking about things like it doesn't exist. And that is feeling like what we're moving towards. We're moving towards a society where, unless you're in a wheelchair or crippled, so to speak, I'm sorry if that's the wrong term, I don't really know what the correct term is anymore, you're not disabled. And that, frankly, is just not true. It's not true. And I feel like targeting people in this group, I just think it's wrong. And people are going to say, well, what is the outcome then? What do we do? And like I've said, we either have to do things like making corporations pay the correct amount of money for taxes, etc. Look at places like Amazon, who get massive tax breaks, right? Amazon's like probably, what is it? Is it the richest company in the world? I mean, it's definitely up there. You know, they get tax breaks. Why? The argument will be because they employ lots of people. Okay, so what are you saying, that their billions upon billions of pounds of profits are not enough to do that? We need to kind of give them more incentive by letting them pay less tax than the average person. The average person who works their entire life, they're taxed on their income, they're taxed when they die, they're taxed on what they buy, they're taxed on everything that they do. I mean, why is it always the little people that need to like kind of suffer the brunt of this? Why don't you go after these bigger companies, these bigger corporations, these offshore companies who are putting their money offshore, tax avoidance, all that type of stuff? I just feel like it's disgusting. And I'll probably get people who come into the comment sections and say things like, well, obviously you're probably then hoping that Scotland becomes independent. And like, it's not something I've ever really hoped. And to be honest, maybe it's partly through fear or whatever. I don't see how Scotland could really afford to do that. So it's why I've not really spoken about this in this video. But I see myself, I have a British passport, I am British. And even though this right now does not affect me because I'm in Scotland, the way these things work is it's going to affect my kids, my life, how things are when it comes to Scotland, you know? And the horrible thing, and this is the thing that, again, a lot of people probably don't realise, I'm maybe in a little bit of a niche scenario where I have twins who are both born with a serious disability. Now, that's probably quite a small percentage of the UK. There'll be lots of parents with disabled children. I just don't know how many would have had twins at the exact same time, so all the strains are doubled at the exact same time. But I do know the stress that even one disabled child can put a family under. And if the kind of standardised disability that people get, which is just a thing, is gone, a lot of those families will not be able to live anymore. And what then ends up happening is those children end up going into the care system, the residential care system. And the cost at that point to the government, believe it or not, this is going to sound crazy to you, it's over £50,000 a year. Well over. Okay, it's something like, I need to do the exact numbers on this, but I think the average cost is like £6,500 per week per child that has to go into state residential care. Okay, and that's what basically happens when parents cannot afford to look after their kids anymore. And some people will say, well, wait a minute, then you've just got to go and do more work, right? But you look at someone like me, for example, and again, this doesn't affect me right now, and I would need to cross this bridge when I come to it, if I come to it. How's that possible? You've got 2 children, those children need 24/7 care, okay? Even if you've got 2 adults at home, one adult cannot generate enough money to the entire house, for the entire house to live. That means the other adult's got to go and work. If the other adult's working, who's caring for the child? I mean, I can't speak for every family, but I don't get any family support because my kids are so challenging and my family are older. They can't do it, they can't manage it. So who then steps in? If no one can step in, what do? You either allow yourself or your children to starve, or you put them into care, which is a horrible thing to think of. But if it comes to that, you've actually then cost the government more money. So I worked this out before. If 10% of people who have to suffer these cuts end up having to put their children, family member, whatever, into some form of residential care because they just cannot do it anymore, even just 5-10%, the cost of that to the government is vastly higher than the savings that would be made by doing cuts like this, you know? And it's things like carers who, like me, you know, I'm classed as a carer. You get a thing called carers allowance. Carers allowance is £80, I think it is, for, that's it. It's £80 a week, you know, and you can't live on that. It's maybe something that can bump up certain things or whatever, but you can't live on it. Fundamentally, you cannot live on it. So you still would need to be in the scenario of going to get a job. And if you're going to get a job, then who cares for the 2 disabled children, the disabled adult that's living with you? You know, it's not always a case of, I'm a carer because my mum's old now and I need to help look after her. I mean, that is some scenarios, and even for those people, if they've got to do that, if they've got to care for them going to the toilet, everything, every aspect of their life, then where is the time for them to work? Some people might say, you have to work the night shift. Okay, you work the night shift. You care for the children, adults, whatever, from 9 until, say, 5-6 o'clock. You then go to work. You come back from work, early hours of the morning. When do you as a human being then sleep? You don't. It doesn't work. There's not enough hours in the day for that to actually be possible. So I feel like this country is heading towards an actual, I want to say this, a catastrophe. Bluntly speaking, it's heading towards a catastrophe because there is literally no way that people can continue if they go down this road. They can't work to make up the deficit. That would punish their benefits even more. They don't have enough hours in the day to do it because there's usually a reason why people are receiving things like disability, carers allowance, which would be attached to the disability because you've got obviously another adult who is then caring for that person. All of these things compounded, I just feel like the government have not in any way, shape or form thought this through. And in a lot of ways it makes me ashamed to be British. And I'm going to say it, I actually find it shameful. And I do not see right now a way out of this, because I'm not even going to say this is a blame Labour thing, because ultimately the alternative is worse. Okay, the alternative is actually worse, and that is what a lot of people right now don't understand. You've got Nigel Farage's party. Honestly, right now the name just completely has gone out my head, because I am kind of gone with this whole topic at the moment. But they want to make even stronger cuts, yet somehow people who are upset about this view that as the alternative. Okay, they've got to go that way, yet they are already quite clearly stated they would do more cuts, they would cut things even more. And then the other one, Tories, they're the same. So it's literally the South Park scenario of, who do you vote for? A giant douche or a shit sandwich? And there is literally not a more apt analogy than that. There is no good option here. It's just bad options. And this is literally through a systematic series of bad governments, bad decisions, bad things that have happened within the UK that has put the UK into a state that it's in. Quite frankly, that is what is going on. And I really hope I don't get discourse in the comments, that's if people even watch this video, of people saying things like, oh, send people back, it's not to do with that. It's not to do with that. And the only reason I even touched on immigration at the start is just what I said before. You've got a housing shortage, not enough houses. How can you possibly bring more people in? It's like, you've got a car that's got 5 seats, you've got 5 people in those seats. Why would you try and pile another 6 people into that car? You don't do that. It doesn't make sense. The car's already full. Don't try and put more people into the car, because there's no space in the car. That's all I'm getting at. Nothing more, nothing less. It's not. People really, hopefully, don't try and turn this into a race thing, because it's not a race thing. It is just quite literally, you want to do that, build more houses, because if you don't build more houses, what are you going to do? But then that's more cost. So how does that even work? I just think at the moment the UK is a shit show. Quite frankly, I think it's an absolute shit show. I feel like there's a lot of political grandstanding, a lot of political gesturing going on, especially with the US. Like a lot of, to be honest, a lot of what Trump's doing, I think's fine. Then a lot of other stuff, then not so much. It's like 50-50. I can look at a situation and go, yep, that's good. Yeah, that's not so good. I don't think you need to be entrenched one way or another, like I've mentioned before, but I feel like a lot of the namby-pamby, pussyfooting about situations is kind of meaning that we are now on the back foot. The UK is about to get hit with a lot of trade tariffs, etc. Yet we're supposed to have a good relationship. It's all down to grandstanding. It's all down to politicians saying, my dick's bigger than your dick, and that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. I mean, it's literally playground bullshit on a national, global scale. And ultimately, the only people that are suffering from it at the end of the day is the populace. And on this occasion, we are the populace. I feel like we're privileged to live in a country like the UK. We have a lot of things that are fantastic, but at the same time, it seems that now a lot of people in society are having to pay the price for it. And yeah, I just do not know where we go from here. But ultimately, I do think it is disgusting, like absolutely disgusting, to essentially make the sick and the disabled, who are the most vulnerable people in society, I think it's disgusting to make them the boogeyman, the big bad. Ultimately, in my opinion, corporate fat cats are probably the big bad. They're the ones that have gobbled up all the money and misused the money for years and years and years. But the people you target at the end of the day are the people who have the least voice, the people who can't stand up for themselves. And I don't know, it just makes me sick, and it does make me ashamed to be from this country. And I don't know where you could go that would be better, to be honest. I really don't know where you could go that it would be better. But for me, I'd say that this is probably the lowest point in my adult life for feeling like I'm part of something, and it's unfortunate. And hopefully someone's eyes are open to this, hopefully we stop having this blind rhetoric of he's a scrounger, he's a scrounger, he's a scrounger, he's a scrounger. And I feel like that's down to the people who game the system. I get it. But you can't just keep labelling everyone that way. Because again, it makes people, some people, especially people who have got serious mental issues, they will start to believe that they are the bad guy, that they are the problem, okay? And if they've already dealing with things that are making them feel low, that are making them feel worthless, how do you think them hearing constantly that they're the problem, they're the bad guy, how do you think that's going to make them react? How do you think that's going to make them feel? And I just think that there's just a massive, massive, massive lack of accountability for that, and I just feel that nobody's thinking about that at all. They're just going on these channels, they're going into this House of Parliament, they're making these statements without actually fully thinking it through, and I just feel like there's going to be a bit of a reckoning. We're going to see how this plays out in a few years' time, but I don't think it's going to play out well. I really don't think it's going to play out well. And that's not sensationalism by me. I just don't think it's going to be something that plays out very well, and I just don't feel like Britain as a country is going to be very proud of itself at the end of all this. And again, it does make me disappointed to be from this country. I know this video was a bit long. I wanted to get this off my chest for a bit because, again, I've just been watching these things, and I probably shouldn't watch these things, but I've said this before, I like to look at things from all angles, and I like to see what people who are pro something say, I like to see what people who are anti something say, because ultimately, without a full view of things, I feel like you are being made to think a certain way rather than thinking a certain way, if that makes sense. And without looking at what one side is saying, I feel like my opinion would just be 100% formed off of what someone wants me to think. But that's what's happening. That is ultimately what's happening to people who only watch these news programs, these talking heads. They are pushing this agenda that the poor, the vulnerable are the problem, and they're the bad guys, and they're the reason why your food's costing so much money, they're the reason why the cost of living's so high, when it's not. It's mismanagement by the government, and it's been happening for years. And something needs to happen, I just don't know what, you know. So unless someone's going to get a V for Vendetta mask and go out there and do something about it, which I'm not encouraging in any way, shape or form, I don't know how this changes. I really don't know how this changes, and I do not know how we kind of take back Britain being good, but someone has to do it, and I just don't think any of the options that are on the table right now are right. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. I doubt very much many of you have made it this far. I doubt many of you will be interested in this topic, but I've made a vow that from now on I want to just do content I want to do. I want to talk about things that I want to talk about, and this is something I wanted to talk about. So like it, hate it, I don't care. If it can generate some discussion, I'll chime in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. I've been Hazink, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video. Peace.